Some folks treat production like a side effect of their real work: networking, polishing, iterating, refining, positioning. Others operate as if the act of making is the work, and everything else is ornamental or secondary. This is the world of the output native, the kind of person for whom the instinct to create, build, or write is reflexive, unmediated, and untethered from any considerations of the optics. There is no algorithm to please, no social graph to cultivate, no committee to consult. There is only the work. In the Renaissance workshops of Florence, apprentices spent years sanding panels, grinding pigments, and copying the hands of their masters before they were allowed a single original commission. Their output was not the performance of genius, it was the steady rhythm of craft. The measure of worth was not audience applause, it was the quiet nod of a master who had seen thousands of brushstrokes before. Being output native is to live in that mode by default, regardless of whether your medium is oil paint, code, metal, or prose. The temptation in the modern age is to invert this order, to think first of the audience, and then of the work, and then of yourself. But the historical arc of enduring creation often flows in the other direction. Jane Austen didn't workshop her chapters in front of a market research panel. She wrote in private, often on small pieces of paper she could hide quickly when visitors arrived. Output natives build with that same sense of self-containment, and it's not because they're indifferent to an audience, it's because the audience is not the primary constraint. This is a path without an algorithm. The 20th century introduced mass media, and with it a new feedback loop. Creators could tailor their work to the tastes of millions, and the internet amplified this into something fractal. Algorithms watch and measure and promote, and the promise is so intoxicating. Instant reach, viral potential, the possibility of global recognition before the ink is dry. But the danger is that the work becomes shaped by the machine's incentives. Output natives resist this gravitational pull. They may use the machine, but they don't orbit it. Their metric of success is the finished thing itself, not the graph of likes that follows. The cathedral builders of medieval Europe did not receive Twitter notifications when a vault was complete. They often died before their work was finished, knowing that another generation would pick up the tools. I'm not talking about nostalgia here, but I do want to acknowledge that craft can outlast the cycles of distribution. The painter Agnes Martin once wrote, "I paint with my back to the world." Her canvases weren't a rejection of reality, they were her commitment to a private vision, executed regardless of its immediate reception. Output natives occupy a similar psychological stance. They're not hiding, they're facing the work, not the crowd. To be output native is to value clarity over clout. Clarity is knowing what you're making, why you're making it, and how you'll know when it's done. And it means working through cycles, iterations of real work completed and assessed, not cycles of self-promotion or performative busyness. In programming, Donald Knuth embodies this approach. His monumental work, The Art of Computer Programming, has been in progress since 1962, with volumes appearing decades apart. Knuth famously stopped using email in 1990 so he could devote uninterrupted attention to writing. And this might not be a practical prescription for everyone, but it does illustrate the underlying principle. Output requires protected cycles of deep engagement. Craft is the natural outcome of these cycles. It emerges from repetition, discipline, and the accumulation of subtle improvements. Craft is slow to build and easy to erode. In medieval Japan, swordsmiths could spend weeks folding and hammering steel, their work measured in strokes and degrees of heat. And the sword was not a commodity, it was the culmination of an unbroken sequence of precise actions. For us, signaling has become frictionless. A thought can be packaged and posted and quantified in seconds. The risk is that the signal begins to replace the substance. It becomes easier to tweet about writing than to write, easier to share a photo of your workbench than to build something with it. Historically, signaling was slower and more expensive. Samuel Johnson couldn't publish a quip every morning to maintain engagement. His reputation was the sum of decades of essays and dictionary entries and public conversations. Output natives recognize that modern signaling tools can be useful, but they're not the arena. The arena is the private struggle with the material. The economist Thomas Schelling once described commitment devices, self-imposed constraints that limit options to force a desired outcome. For an output native, the workshop, the studio, or the blank text editor can be such a device. By making output the center of gravity, they limit the temptation to spend their best hours curating a persona. And there is a paradox in being output native. Sometimes the work markets itself, simply because it's good. The original Macintosh was born from obsessive attention to design and engineering. Steve Jobs pushed for perfection, and wasn't a growth hack, it was an expression of taste. The marketing emerged later, built on the shock of encountering a machine that felt different from everything else on the market. You can see this as a pattern across domains. A mathematician publishes a proof in an obscure journal, and years later it becomes the foundation for an industry. A musician records an album for personal satisfaction, and it develops a cult following. In each case, the initial act is pure output, and the reception is an emergent property. It's not the original target. I'm not saying you can ignore distribution entirely. My point is more that distribution without substance is a shell, and substance without immediate distribution is at least a seed. There is a kind of kinship among those who operate in this mode, and they can recognize each other by their patterns, long stretches of quiet, punctuated by releases of finished work, conversations that revolve around process instead of performance metrics, and indifference to the current trending topic. In the arts, this tribe includes figures like Cormac McCarthy, who famously avoided book tours and interviews, preferring to put his energy into the next novel. In science, it includes people like Barbara McClintock, who spent decades studying corn cytogenetics in relative isolation, earning a Nobel Prize late in life. And in technology, it includes open source contributors who maintain vital infrastructure without attaching their names to it. The signal they send, often without meaning to, is that they're here for the work itself. It's the tribe signal of the output native. It's legible to those who share it, invisible or irrelevant to those who don't. The hard part is protecting this default state in a world that constantly invites you to reverse it. The platforms and feeds are designed to turn you into an input native, a consumer of signals, an optimizer of reach, a participant in endless conversations that never produce a damn thing. Guarding the output native stance means setting hard limits on social media time, batching communication, designing your physical environment to bias toward making. And it might mean saying no to opportunities that would increase visibility at the cost of slowing your cycles of creation. The historian Edward Gibbon spent 26 years writing the history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. He produced it in 6 volumes, each the result of sustained solitary labor. In a letter to a friend, he described his method as the silent and successful labor of many years. In an era of constant notification, the ability to sustain such labor is rarer than ever. The output natives think in horizons longer than the algorithm's memory. They may care about immediate reception, but they care more about whether the work will hold up in a decade. I wouldn't call this mysticism. It's more a pragmatic understanding that durable value emerges from depth, not from speed. Horace, writing in the 1st century BCE, advised poets to keep their work for 9 years before publishing it. The number is arbitrary, but the spirit is not. Time tests the work, and time reveals the creator's relationship to it. In modern terms, the equivalent might be a willingness to revise a project over months or years without the constant demand to ship for engagement's sake. There will always be counterexamples. Viral successes born in an afternoon, careers built entirely on personality and promotion. But the record of enduring achievement, in art, science, and technology alike, leans toward those who made first and worried later. Being output native is not a guarantee of success, nor is it moral superiority. It is simply a mode, a default stance toward creation that places making at the center and everything else in orbit. In a culture that feels increasingly optimized for instant recognition, this stance can feel countercultural. But I think we always have a choice, whether we accept the cultural gravity or set our own. And the measure is simple. When you sit down to work, do you open the analytics dashboard or the tool of your craft? The answer to that question, repeated over hundreds of cycles, will determine whether you're living as output native or something else entirely.